Is it another Muslim ban? Or is it a new approach to how immigration is treated in the United States? Well, whatever it is, the new preclusion on immigration from a host of countries announced by Donald Trump has taken the world by storm. My name's Tom Harwood and this is GBN Originals. Well, it's a host of countries, from those closer to America like Venezuela to those further afield like Yemen, that have been put on the list of countries whereby people will be blocked from emigrating to the United States in all but a very small number of circumstances. Countries like Iran, like Afghanistan, countries that the Trump administration say harbour, create terrorism, and indeed have a different attitude to how they collect criminal records in their countries too. These are countries that the Trump administration argues are less likely to accept deportees from the United States back to their countries. And this in some ways turns on its head the approach of the United States towards migration and refugees. In countries like the United Kingdom, the more dangerous a country you come from, the more likely it is you'll be able to come and live and work and settle in the United Kingdom. Our system to accept refugees says that if you come from a dangerous country, it's almost impossible for us to send you back there. Meanwhile, if you come by small boat from a safe country to the United Kingdom, well, it's more likely that the UK will be able to send you back. So in the United Kingdom, we have a system whereby the more dangerous a country you come from, the more likely it is that you'll be granted asylum in the UK. What Donald Trump has just said in the United States is that that is going to be turned on its head. The more dangerous a country you come from, the less likely it is you'll be able to settle, live, work, and stay in the United States. But this, of course, will run into questions in the courts. When Donald Trump instituted his initial Muslim ban, banning immigration from Muslim-majority countries, that got watered down and changed over the course of the policy through the courts, because you can't discriminate against a specific religion. That was deemed to be less than constitutional. What you could do, however, is deny countries on a certain grounds of safety. What will matter in the case of the United States is what is the formula that the president has put forward, that the administration is delivering, and has it been equally applied to every country? Have they taken the propensity to harbour terrorism and added to it the number of criminals or the lack of criminal data? Is there a consistent formula that they have been able to apply to every country to deliver this sort of ban? Or is it arbitrary? Is it arbitrary because it excludes certain countries? Countries like Saudi Arabia, countries like Egypt that have in the past been associated with terror networks. Could it be that there has been some more political decision-making in the back of what has been worked out to be this new travel ban? That remains to be seen, and that is the legal jeopardy in the courts. That is where this entire policy may begin to unravel. But it could be that, having learnt from the first iteration of the travel ban, that the administration has crossed its T's and dotted its I's in a greater way than before. But here at GB News, we wanted to have that debate. What are the pros? What are the cons? And what's the legality of this system? What's the morality of this system? Will it stay or will it go? We sat down with a professor at the Clinton Institute, Scott Lucas, to get his view on what exactly is going on in the administration. Now, President Trump has signed an order banning people from 12 countries entering the United States.
Yes. He said Sunday's attack in Colorado had shown the extreme dangers of foreign nationals who are not properly vetted, as well as those who come as temporary visitors and overstay their visas.
Of course, that attack in Colorado was made by an Egyptian national. Egypt, not one of those countries on the ban list. But the White House said that some of the countries on the list had a significant terrorist presence. and accused others of poor screening for dangerous individuals and not accepting deportees.
OK, well, joining us now is Professor of International Politics at the Clinton Institute, Scott Lucas. So, the President, he's allowed to do this, but we expect legal challenges.
We do wonder if he'll be allowed to do this. When you had the first ban in 2017, which started off as the Muslim ban, that was initially struck down by the courts. Of course, the administration modified it. They added some non-Muslim countries to the list. And in the end, it was a 5-4 Supreme Court decision that allowed that ban to stand. Now, this ban is much more sweeping than that ban. And significantly, there has been no evidence produced as to why these 12 countries are the ones who are on the ban list, with seven others facing restrictions. So if this faces a legal challenge, at a minimum, I think the administration is going to have to produce some evidence as to how they came up with this list.
He's given the reasons, hasn't he? He said a large-scale presence of terrorists, failure to cooperate on visa security, inability to verify travellers' identities, inadequate keeping of criminal histories in those countries, and persistently high rates of illegal visa overstays and other things. Now, I've done a cursory glance at the top 10 most dangerous countries in the world, and let me tell you that a lot of these countries appear in that list. And also, if you look at the top 10 countries with the highest visa overstay rates in the United States of America, again, those countries feature.
But you do realize that the people who are fleeing these countries to become asylum seekers and refugees are actually fleeing those dangerous situations, right? They're actually people who are innocent people who are trying to escape. Let me give you an example. Do you think people who are opposed to the rule of the Taliban in Afghanistan should be protected if they face persecution? Do you?
You're asking me a question. Sorry, what was that, Scott Lucas?
Do you think people who flee the Taliban, fearing persecution in Afghanistan, deserve protection?
Well, I want to ask you the questions. Do you think that potentially there might be risks in having high levels of immigration from countries that are particularly dangerous and have a lot of terrorism in those countries?
Since you won't answer, let's work on this. That is that the vast majority of Afghans who are fleeing Afghanistan since the Taliban took over in 2021 have been at fear for their lives because of Taliban rule. The Trump administration has responded by stripping those Afghans who are in the United States, many of whom worked with U.S. forces, of temporary protected status.
But we've already seen that he's making an exemption for those people.
He's made a partial exemption. Many of them have still at risk of being deported. Now, what he has done now is any Afghan who tries to get in the United States without any evidence that they are a threat is banned. What about Iran? Do you think people who are worried about the rule of the clerics in Iran, where there are human rights abuses, do you think they should be protected?
Well, I think there is a big question mark over Iran, certainly. I mean, in this country, we have a lot of dissidents who have claimed refuge in this country who hate what's going on in their country in terms of human rights abuses. I'm talking about the general desire for a president to want to protect American citizens from potentially immigration from dangerous countries. Do you think, as a principle, that is something that a president should be able to do?
Well, the first thing is that principle is always supposed to be backed up by evidence and rule of law. And there is no evidence which has been produced behind this executive order. But let me produce some evidence which we could factor into this. Immigrants in the United States are 40% less likely to commit crimes, including violent crimes, than U.S. citizens. So using the rationale of Donald Trump, the greatest threat to Americans is actually Americans themselves.
This is so interesting because that data in the United States is particular to the United States. There has been other data, for example, from the Netherlands, from other European countries, that has shown that perhaps these countries have a lower level of crime to start with, particularly violent crime. We know that America has a higher level of violent crime than most European countries. But what's really interesting digging down into this data is that it's not that immigrants are one homogenous block.
Exactly.
It's that immigrants from certain countries, certain societies, certain cultures tend to have lower propensity to commit crime. But there are some immigrants from some societies, from some cultures, that have a higher propensity to commit crime. And more to that, there are some countries that tend to be net fiscal positive transfers. People who come who earn above the average wage for someone in this country. But then there are countries where, astonishingly, majorities end up on subsidised social housing. 72% of Somalians living in the UK live in subsidised social housing. It's an extraordinary statistic. So there is some differentiation that you can make between countries rather than seeing immigrants as a homogenous group.
Sure, and we could make the differentiation to say that, in fact, while immigrants are less likely in the UK to commit violent crime, that while legal immigrants have, in fact, made a net economic contribution to the UK and consistently have done so. I was an immigrant in the UK for many years. That you could take the case of Somalis and ask, well, why in the case of Somalia, which is a country which suffered particular hardship, why you have got that particular issue that Somalis have not, in effect, made it as perhaps others in other communities. We could look at housing. We could look at the job patterns. We could look at a whole range of social issues. And I think we could have that discussion. But that takes me back to where I started with Trump. That's not the discussion this administration's having. They're not drilling down. They didn't give you any evidence for these specific countries. They just simply slapped 12 countries on a list. And go back to your starting point. The rationale.
But what I would say, Scott Lucas, is if you do look at the data of overstays, it's basically like for like. So the countries that have the highest rates of overstaying visas, which was one of the main points that Trump used for these countries. Sure. Now, I'm not saying this is a fantastic policy. I'm just trying to say that there kind of is evidence that these countries have higher overstay rates. They're in the top 10. You've got Chad, you've got Equatorial Guinea, you've got Sudan, you've got Eritrea, you've got Haiti, you've got Afghanistan. If he's talking about overstays, then it makes sense.
Where there might be a difference, though, is there isn't a clear formula, because, yes, a lot of those top 10 countries are in the...
And there's a lot of terrorism in a lot of those countries. But not all of those top 10 countries. And then there's a question mark of somewhere like Saudi Arabia, which clearly has a lot of questions to answer over where those 9/11 terrorists were trained and funded and all the rest of it. But obviously, there's been a political decision there, because Saudi is an ally of the United States.
Emily, shall we answer your question, Emily? Because that's a really good one. Rather than actually look at the question of there being a threat to national security, the Trump administration officials, including Stephen Miller, looked at that visa overstay list, and that was the easy target list that they got. And they just grabbed countries off of that list. If you actually go back to the start of your excellent point that you made, Mohammed Suleiman, the man who committed the hate crime in Colorado, is from Egypt. Now, if you're saying the rationale is to stop immigrants from committing violent crimes, why is Egypt not on that list? In other words, this is a PR exercise, taking the visa overstay question and completely divorcing it from any rational approach to national security.
Yeah, I mean, there's also the countries that are on the overstay list are also countries, a lot of them have a high rate of terrorism. A lot of them have a high level of ethnic conflict as well, and general violence. So it's not just the overstay.
And you know what they also have? They have a lot of students and researchers and academics and skilled workers who have been coming to the United States to try to find a better place to live. When you shut off any person coming from these countries, this means that you will not get that skill set. Ask yourself, while Elon Musk came out against this administration a few months ago, when they tried to shut down legal immigration, including from these countries, why did Musk come after them? Because Musk was actually saying you need skilled workers, and you need them, for example, from an Iran, from an Afghanistan, or indeed from a country like Myanmar. Which has one of the
Well, Scott Lucas, thank you very much indeed for that back and forth. Professor of International Politics at the Clinton Institute there.
Yeah, we'll have to have you back. That was actually really... I thought we got into the weeds there.
Yeah, I think it's certainly fair to say that they haven't put forward their workings on why these countries, but if you do a little cross-check from some of the points that he said, a lot of these countries do make sense. The question of Egypt, I don't know if he just wanted to use that example because it was the latest terror attack, rather than specifically focusing on Egypt. But even so, let us know your views.
There's such an interesting distinction between sort of the principle, should it be harder to come from these countries with a lot of conflict, versus should it be impossible? And I think maybe there's probably a middle ground here between what you both were arguing, that, I mean, you should have a lot more, and I mean a lot more checks on people from certain countries to make sure that the person coming from Iran is a critic of the regime rather than a follower of the regime. I mean, that seems like a sensible thing to do for Iran that you might not have to do for
I
Australia?
think there's a little bit of naivety, dare I say, from Scott Lucas to suggest that everyone coming from all of these countries must be escaping something. You don't know. People bring their ideologies with them. Anyway, let's move on.
Well, what did you make of that? Did you agree with some of the holes picked in the system? What about the Iranian dissidents who hate the Islamist regime that they're fleeing from? Surely they should be welcome in America. Or do you think that it's simply too hard to tell the good from the bad? A simple ban might be the best way through. That seems to be the argument of the Trump administration, but we're yet to see all of the exemptions as they might roll forward. We'll keep a close eye on it here on GBN Originals, so remember to hit that big red shining subscribe button and stay up to date as we progress through a turbulent policy world.